Hello everyone, this is Audrey and welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about YAML. And the reason I want to talk about YAML is because I was relatively new on the Copilot Studio focus area and I got hit with YAML like on day 5. And I was like, what is this? Right? I was familiar with JSON from Power Automate and other places, and all of a sudden I had to figure out what is the YAML here for me. And so I wanted to share the things that I've learned and also give you some tips on how you can use it, right? So I'm going to start, this video is in 2 parts, the shortest part being the what is it, for those of you that may be like me and were like, what is this thing and why do I need it? And then more important than the what is YAML in general is the how does it add value to Copilot Studio? So I'm going to spend the majority of the video on that. So feel free to skip around. So what you see on the screen is a screenshot from Visual Studio Code of the top of one of my files, which is a YAML file. You can see I just captured a screenshot, and on the right you see that I chose the type YAML. You can download Visual Studio Code for free. It's a great tool for kind of looking at code, also playing around with code for those of you that like to be geeks like me. All right, let's take a really close-up look at this because it is, what I'm sharing here on in these first 6 lines of the code is just the answer to my question. What is this? YAML is a data serialization language. And of course, us the geeky tech people, we got to use words that sound important. But it's really much simpler than that. It's a human readable way of looking at configuration. So in the industry, it's known as human readable and computationally powerful. Okay, YAML stands for YAML ain't markup language. And this is kind of a funny redundancy that it has here, but I think it's a really good definition because sometimes people might be thinking that this is markup. This is the way we say something is bold or underscored, or maybe this is the way we decide what colors things will be shown. This has absolutely nothing to do with the UI that the consumer of the product is using. All right. It does not help you mark up language. It does not help you design what things look like. It's a configuration file, and that's purely what it is, a very simple configuration file. Now I'm just going to call up my little pin here because it's made up of keys and values. Those of you that are used to JSON have seen that in the past. And these keys and values are formatted with spacing and indentation, all right, which makes them extremely clean compared to XML and JSON. Right? So I spent many years playing around with XML, XSLT, if I remember correctly, back in my SharePoint days, where we used that heavily when we were building content pages. Now, JSON, which I'm familiar with from mostly Power Automate, has taught me another way of looking at keys and values and thinking about how they're formatted into arrays and different objects and so on, right? But actually, the YAML is actually more approachable than both XML and JSON. And even developers say it's a more approachable configuration language, right? And you'll see how easy it is to read configurations. The extensions you'll see for this file is YAML, Y-A-M-L, or YAML, Y-M-L. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this really quick before we go into Copilot Studio. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code here, and I have a file I'm hoping that I can find quickly. Okay, so here's the file I'd like to show you. This is where you were getting that screenshot earlier of the top of this screen, just reminding us what this is. That's all that's answering. And just remember, YAML ain't markup language. It is purely a configuration file. And I'm going to kind of illustrate to you how this works from a keys and values and formatting perspective. First, I'm using up here at the top, you see these hashtags. Whenever somebody puts a hashtag in the front of a line in YAML, that is a comment. So these are just comments, and someone reading this configuration file would know that the comments are just ways that I use to help understand how this is breaking down. All right. So when you're writing YAML, you have to know how to handle the different types of data that you might want to refer to in your configuration file. So here I'm starting with string, and I just have to type a key, and a key is recognizable because it's usually a single word followed by a colon, right? Sometimes we'll do underscores like here, right? That key is followed by a value. Now in this case, the key is product and the value is Power Platform. Those of you that are very accustomed to JSON may be feeling, Audrey, where's your quotation marks? No quotation marks are needed in YAML to identify a string. You can tell it's being recognized as a string because it has a unique color. And you can see this. Those of you that may have color challenges, it doesn't matter what color is, just notice that it's a certain color. When it's a color, it means it's correct, right? I can add quotes if I want to. Either single or double is up to me, right? But I don't need them. They're not necessary, okay? It will recognize it as string. Now, down here where I get to number, where I have a key called year started, now when I start typing that, as long as it thinks as a number, you see that the color is different, right? Because that's a number and it knows it's a number. Even if I put dots after it, it's a number, right? So it's going to keep that number color. If I want to take a number and make it a string for some reason, remember this is just a configuration file, I can put quotes around it, which makes it a string, okay? But I'm going to leave it a number because it's a number, right? And you can see clearly that it's recognizing this format. Then we have Boolean, right? And this one is kind of cool because it has some options. It could be true, false. It could be yes, no. It could be on, off. All of that applies in YAML for Boolean. And all I'm using is true. But I could most definitely, instead of saying true, I could say yes. And you get the same color blue there. That indicates that it's Boolean. Or I could say no. So I can use all of those options. I'm going to stick with true just because I'm carrying over habits from JSON, basically. Now, you have some multi-line options, and I'll talk about why. So whenever you type a key with a string, like we did up here and like I did here, the string does not really wrap. There's no wrapping of text in YAML. Okay, it just goes on forever and ever and ever, and that's a single string. If you want it to appear like it's multi-line, then you can use the pipe, right? And when you type the pipe, which is shift underneath your backspace key, right? You'll find the pipe. Then you just space or tab to the first line, right? So I can go here and I can tab and type, right? Now, this is me deciding how I want these lines to end on the screen. Sorry, I got a snippet turned itself on. But it's still, even though it looks like it's multiple lines, because I'm locking these lines in from a display perspective, it's still just one line of text. It's just a multi-line, looks like it's multi-line because of the pipe, all right? So it's making a block format for my configuration file only. It's not going to change anything wherever that text might show up in the UI, okay? Then I have a list, right? A list might be something like this, where I have a key that says internal product names. And then to make a list, you do the similar thing. You do a tab, but then you make a dash and a space. And you'll see that's probably the extent of all of your formatting in YAML. Tab, dash, space, right? So tabs and spaces pretty common used in order to structure the format of your different file types. I mean, different data types, right? So here I just want a list, and I actually put all my internal names here, and you can tell that's a list, right? I could also display a list more like an array, right? Like we see in JSON by opening the quote, the brackets. So if I delete this and I just open a single left bracket, it'll finish it for me to close it. And then I can put any list of things in there separated by commas to make my list. I can also create my own dictionaries, which is pretty much a different kind of an object list, right? So then you have these different, I have a CEO, I have an EVP, and I have a CVP in my leadership team dictionary. And then I might want to have an object, right? And an object might be multiple keys for a certain thing. And you can tell that when I'm changing in here, so this is Power BI, its GA year was 2015, whereas Power Apps, its GA year was 2017. And if I want another set in this grouping, I can add something else here and put its different values in there. So very straightforward, super easy to read. Now, how will you find this in Copilot Studio? Okay, let's talk about that. Now, I've done this on slides first, but we are going to go into the product together. And the reason is because I wanted you to be able to see this side by side first, okay? And then we'll go in the product together. All right, so here on the left side of this screen, you see what we call, the typical conversation flow and the different nodes. On the right, you see the YAML for what's on the left, okay? So basically, this is the out-of-the-box conversation start topic, and you'll see topics referred to as dialogues inside of YAML, and that's because we're all based on bot framework, and topics are dialogues, right? And so you'll see adaptive dialogue as your kind. You'll see which kind this is. This is an on-conversation start. All right. And as we look at some of these different examples, you'll start to notice the difference in the kinds, right? Then we have actions, right? Which are the nodes that follow the trigger, right? And so in this case, we only have two. We have a send activity kind, which is a send message. And we have a redirect, which is another method of directing to another begin dialogue. So we are redirecting to begin another dialogue. This one is optional. Normally you don't see this one here in Conversation Start. I put it here on purpose just to show you kind of what this looks like when it redirects, right? But what you notice right away is that if I wanted to get to the rest of this text using the node, I would click on this and then I'd be inside of that text and I could go and edit it. If I wanted to learn what other properties are available, I can use the drop down and the three dots to learn more, right? But look at how the YAML just flattens out the configuration. I see everything from top to bottom. So you know what I call this? I call this my topic one pager. That has everything I need right there in view. I don't need to click anywhere. There's everything, right? So sometimes I do like to be able to leverage YAML for that one pager view. All right, so everything is here, no clicking required, right? Now, in addition to looking at that, I'd like to show you the conversation boosting. Remember, I purposely put that redirect to conversation boosting so that you could see that this one is often called topic.search. Now, it may have different names because it's going to have the prefix from the environment, from the solution, and then it'll have the name of the bot, and then it'll have topic search. But that is always conversational boosting. And so what you'll get used to YAML is you'll start to recognize repeating patterns, and you'll know what these things are, right? And so here I am in conversation boosting. I was redirected here, and notice there's a formula here. There's also 3 websites in the SharePoint drive, and there's some condition, right? Outside the fact that I added websites to the OneDrive and a formula, this is pretty much out of the box. And as you look over here, you can see this is a begin dialogue and the kind is on unknown intent. Now you can't see the trigger above this, but this is when the intent is unknown. So I don't have to redirect to here actually. When the intent is unknown, it would redirect itself. But I redirected here so you could see it in the YAML, right? And then the kind of action that you have here is called search and summarize content. Bing, 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 bing. The clue on that is that's generative answers. That is generative answers. So whenever you see that kind, you know that that's a node with generative answers, right? And so also you can see here, I can see I have a formula, but I might have to click, do a little hover, and maybe a little 2 clicks just the right way to get the whole formula. However, in YAML, I can see the whole formula here, including anything that I configured in there. I can see not only that there's 3 public websites, but I can see which 3 public websites under the object here. So we can see this here is public data source, and under public data source is the sites. All right. So whenever we're dealing with the search and summarize content, we may have some public data and some SharePoint data being used. Okay. Here I'd have to click to find out what they are. Here, like I said, it's a 1-pager. Everything is flattened out here so I can see all of my configuration. Even my custom instructions that would take click 1 to get into the edit, click 2 at the top to hit an arrow, and then scroll down to the bottom. So almost 3 kind of clicks. I see it right here in YAML right away. I also see my tone and my moderation, right? I see which variable is being used to store the response as well. So again, just focusing on, it's a 1-pager for the topic. It's kind of flattening out the configuration. If I go to the next page, here's an example of an adaptive card in YAML, right? So on the left, the adaptive card is blank. I'm gonna give you the challenge. I'll give you 10 seconds. That's it. Why is that card blanked out? What are the reasons why you wouldn't see the card in this canvas? Okay, those of you who said because there may be a formula involved are right. Because if it's anything dynamically related to this card, it can't show you the card because the dynamism hasn't occurred yet, right? And so you'll find that your card will blank out, right? Because it has a formula. So this one, if I were to hit those 3 dots, probably has the property set to formula and not JSON, right? Because there's some formulas involved. But when I look at this from a YAML perspective, it's very clear. Now I truncated it because it doesn't all fit on the screen, but everything about this card is going to be visible in the YAML. Next, condition groups. Now this was the first way I met YAML actually, because I was trying to copy a node with conditions. And when I did that using the UI, just selecting the node and the conditions and then hitting the little copy icon at the top and then pasting, my variables would blank out. And I think that was protecting from like duplicate values. But I found that I could clone and revise using YAML. So if I cut out this condition group and paste it into a different node, into a different topic, it doesn't blank out my variables and it works really well. So I like it for cloning and revising as well, where I want to clone a little bit more specifically than just saying copy topic, right? And you can see that the condition group is identified. This is truncated on the left because there's some conditions on the left and there's some conditions on the right, but you can see the grouping here, right? So there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 conditions, right? From what we can see on this screenshot, right? The first condition is if this global variable is inclusive behaviors. Then it's going to go to conversational boosting. Now, why do I know that? Because it is my bot name followed by topic.search. I know that's conversational boosting. So it will go in there and send that prompt on top of the LLM. Now, I can go to this page and show you that there is also some extra instructions in here, but that's how that happened. Now, but however, with this condition, if it's employee D&I, then it actually goes to a different topic called stories. So you can see every time you see begin dialogue, that means it's redirecting to somewhere, right? And you can see this on the left, redirect to proofreading. You can see that down here, begin dialogue, topic proofreading. Right? And so these are the conditions clearly outlined in the YAML. That simple 1-pager view. I don't need to click to see the text that's hidden. It's just flat. It's there. Right? Now, here's some great ideas for use. And then we're gonna try one of these at least together in Copilot Studio. So first, I love this for sharing YAML as a model or a template example. right? So we'll do this together, right? Henri did a great one about the carousels inside of the conversation panel. So we'll do that actually together. You can also expedite batch changes. So let's say you're dealing with a bot that is still using phrases and not, so this should be phrases, not phases, but it's using phrases and not dynamic chaining. Then you might want to just go ahead and add 10 phrases just by copying and pasting into your YAML. You don't need to keep hitting that plus sign and doing it in the UI. You can do that. Just be careful. I wouldn't play around here if you're brand new to dealing with this type of code, because the skipping of a comma, the deletion of a colon will cause red things to happen. And I'll show you that as well. You can add nodes between activities. So you can take one of those send activities, which is a send a message. You can copy that little block and then paste it and just revise it. Really helpful when you have very similar messages and you just want to slightly revise them. You can do that kind of thing. Let's say you're trying to help somebody to troubleshoot something and you're just not getting it in what they're explaining to you. Maybe on the phone or something. You could say, could you share your YAML with me and tell them how to copy and paste it out and give it to you? And then you can import that into your own Copilot, and maybe that'll give you a greater ability to troubleshoot. You can also use the YAML to update configuration values. And I thought this was an outstanding idea from my peer, Nitu. So Nitu does a lot of flows, and so do a lot of us. But we all know that sometimes the flows need to be changed in a flow, or the output or the input of the flow has changed and it hasn't caught up to Copilot Studio. You've all been there. You can actually go into the YAML, change the flow ID if you want to swap the flow out. Maybe you cloned and revised the one that wasn't working. You could also change the input and output values. Okay, this is not for the faint of heart, but it actually can be quite helpful. You can cut and paste condition nodes with low loss of configuration. I talked to you about that earlier. And I always suggest that if you're working in a Fusion team and you have developers, as you're teaching them or informing them about what you're doing in Copilot Studio, make sure they know they can view the code in Copilot Studio. Show them where they can view the code, because they will find it more readable than just learning how to move around in the conversational flow UI. Okay? All right, let's go to Copilot Studio together. I have this Copilot called YAML testing, and I'm in the conversation start. All right, and you can see this is the out-of-the-box conversation start. I think I took a few words out, right? But here's the thing you want to show your Fusion team devs so that they know they can read this in code as well. Just hit them 3 dots. They're at the top right, at the very top of the Copilot Studio canvas, right under the Microsoft 365 bar. You can just select Open Code Editor. They will love you for showing them this, so please do, okay? So you'll open the code editor and you'll see the actual code or the configuration of that topic, right? And you can see here that it's actually using a variable to fill in the bot name. So YAML testing Audrie. But I don't want my bot to say that to somebody. That's just my internal name that I don't really want anybody to know. So I can say I'm InclusiBot, right? Or whatever I want to call this bot, right? And then when I close the editor, that change will be taken. I could also have done it directly in the UI, but I just wanted you to see you can not only view the code, but you can also edit the code. Now, remember I told you that you could get code from somebody else and then use it in your Copilot? So here's the thing. My manager, Henri, who is a genius at Copilot Studio, and I'm not saying that for obvious reasons. I'm saying that because he's really good at configuring Copilots. He actually did a sample carousel for the conversation panel. A lot of people want carousels in here, and it's not really a straightforward thing. So he built one that was really nice, and then he shared a YAML file in the community. Now, when people share these files, they normally zip them into a zip file just because it's just better for portability. But then when you download it, open the zip file and pull out the YAML, all right? Let's do that So I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code here. I'm going to close this. And I have put on my desktop the YAML that was in the zip file that Audrie put on the community, right? And so if you just scroll through this, and the reason I like to open it in Visual Studio Code first is primarily because I do want to take a look at it kind of sometimes, and I'm comfortable in Visual Studio Code. You could have used Notepad, you could have used anything you want, or you can just bring it straight in. But what I'm going to do is highlight all of this and copy it. Now, I will say, one of you didn't see this like blotch of numbers and stuff. You're probably wondering, hey, Audrie, when you did that example a few minutes ago, we didn't see any of this weird looking codey stuff looking like it came out of a robot's mouth. That is just an example of an SVG file. Anyone who has ever used SVG files, you'll know that their references are pretty extraordinary, right? So he actually used SUV files, but that could be an image URL for that key, right? Everything else is straightforward YAML. There's only those SUV files that are referenced in here. But I will take a look sometime at stuff before I import it, right? So I'm just going to go to topics, and I'm going to leave this one, and I'm going to create one from blank. I believe I copied that to the clipboard. And now, once I get this blank one up, I might just give it a name like Carousel, because that's what this is about. I'm going to close anything out of my way, and I'm going to open the code editor. Remember, it's always at the far top right of Copilot Studio, right beneath that banner, you know. All right, open code editor. And now I don't want this, right, because that's got nothing. I'm going to paste the code that he gave me. Now, here's the thing. Here's the thing. Everybody listen up close. Don't start messing around in here unless you got some real good skills, right? Because all you have to do is accidentally remove something, like a comma, or a dash, or a colon, and you're going to start seeing red, right? And I will tell you, the error messages aren't like non-technical friendly, all right? So when you paste this stuff in here, be careful not to be like mishing around in there. Get it pasted, and then close that editor, and then you can review it from a UI perspective, whether you have developer skills or not, all right? And then now you can actually see exactly how this is done. Now, my recommendation to you is that, and I'm going to add a phrase and trigger this. I'm just going to use the trade open card. I'm just making a fake trigger because I don't think dynamic chaining is turned on, so we don't need a prompt here, but I just need a way to trigger it. So I'm just going to save that, and I'm going to type open card. Just give it a minute to save, and you'll see this beautiful card, right? And yes, this is available online. Let me know in the chat if you haven't seen it. And I actually just recently did an article about this to tell you, how it was built. Okay, it'll be published soon. But you see, here is my, can I zoom in here? I don't know. Let's see how big I can make that. You can see this carousel. So basically, as you click these arrows, it's flipping through some choices. And then depending on where you are when you pick that choice, you click learn more. So it's like a carousel. Really nice. He did an awesome job with this. But now that you have it in your own environment, because you've brought in the YAML, now you can revise it. Now, I strongly suggest, and this is what I personally do, I have a folder in my OneDrive dedicated to my YAML. Right? Just like I have a folder in my OneDrive dedicated to my complex flows, right? And I put all my YAML in that folder, and it becomes a permanent record to me. And I have a OneNote that says, okay, that YAML does this, and that YAML does that, right? So I'm very organized in keeping these things as a reference, because once you start cloning and revising, if things start going wrong, you can always start over. Okay, so keep track of what you have. I do want to point out one more thing, and that is similarly, right, when I'm working with adaptive cards, I will save the JSON. So do I have one? Is this one? I think this one has got some formulas in it. Let's double check. Remember I said those adaptive cards will blank out if they have formulas, right? Because it's a dynamic value. So it really can't build a card until the dynamic value is received. So this is an example, right? And so when I hit the properties here, it says formula, because I've revised this to move to formula from JSON in order to put topic references in here or variable references in here. But if I change this back to JSON, all of my JSON's going to disappear. This is where you start saying like those dirty words and stuff. So what I like to do is I keep my JSON in a comment. That way I can always go back to it when I want to. If I think I might go back to it with this card, I'll remove this before it becomes a public solution, but it stays in there where I'm building. And then this whole thing may end up in a folder in my OneDrive that says, you know, code for adaptive cards, right? You've seen me publish adaptive card samples for Power Automate. I keep that in a separate folder. So try to be organized when you're taking snippets of code and you're using it, whether it be JSON, adaptive cards, or YAML, right? Actually track that code because you might want to reuse it another time. I hope this was helpful. This was just my way to show you that I really think that the fact that YAML is integrated so well into Copilot Studio, it doesn't just make life easy for developers, but it's also valuable to makers. And I think it makes things easy when it comes to reading the configuration in what I call a one-pager view. So I'll be talking to you soon. I hope you continue to enjoy your Copilot Studio. We're going to be talking again, and I'm going to keep sharing with you as I take the journey of mastering custom Copilots. You have an awesome weekend. I'm looking forward to our next conversation.